Welcome back to Love Adventures in Art. Please join us on the Queen Mine Tour. Welcome to Love Adventures in Art, where we like to have fun, have adventures, and be creative.
Welcome to the Copper Queen Mine Tour. And you're going to learn a little bit about mining, a little bit of history, and a little bit of the culture of the miners who came here to pull those rocks out of the ground. For 97 years they made a life and made a living pulling those rocks out. And you're going to find out if there had not been a Copper Queen mine, there probably would not be a Bisbee, Arizona. So, a little tension builder there, right?
Yeah.
You're wondering what's that about? Well, you're going to find out. Now, as we go underground, we always wanted to be safe, just like the old-timer miners were safe as well. The way we're going to make sure we're safe is with three different items of safety concern. Number one is a safety vest. Everybody gets a safety vest. Go ahead and slide this on for me. Put this on, then we're going to head underground. Now, when we head underground, we're going to be riding 100-year-old trains.
All right,
Also, you can take any
about to go underground, Silver Queen Mine.
Copyrights or anything like that. You're going to ride these man cars, going to straddle that yellow bench like you're getting on a motorcycle or a bicycle, facing that mountain door.
Do we go on?
We can go further back.
I don't know. Here, we'll go.
Are you on vacation?
Styling.
About to get going here. Probably gonna end up turning this camera off for most of it. It's probably not gonna be able to see anything, but get you a shot of us going in. I'm really excited. Been looking forward to this. Ooh, and yeah, hold it and jerky. Hang on to your hard hats. Let's flip you around.
Ooh. Little jerky there.
Yeah, definitely a little quirky and old. And it's gonna be bumpy, so hang on to that good. Hard hats required.
All right, everyone. Thank you so very much for coming on our tour. I hope you liked it. No, actually, there's a lot more to see. Now, as your eyes are getting used to the dark, let me give you some background. Exactly where the heck are you? Well, we're the very first mine that was driven here. They drove the tunnel here, put down the track, and they came to this particular mountain in 1877. Long time ago. 97 years they spent down here pulling that rock out of the ground. So they were very busy. Up ahead here on the left-hand side, you can see a sign and it says Copper Queen Shaft. What does that mean to you? Well, that's the very first shaft they drove. And as we go past it, you can peep down there to the left-hand side. It goes down about 400 feet, and it goes down. You can see some ladders, some landings, and something the miners call laggings. And that's a word that's new to you, but a lagging is a 2x12 board that goes against the face to keep it all stable. we'll go right past there. You hear the wheels on this train squeaking as you go around that curve. Now we'll go past that original shaft, then we'll come to an air door. And what's that mean? Well, that means that door's shut, and it means that there's captive air flowing around in there, backed up by a 50 horsepower fan, and it's moving that air constantly. And that's there to give us the best air quality we can achieve, because it's pulling that air right off from the top of this mountain. So as we go down here, we need to keep a couple things in mind. They did work here 97 years. In the heyday of the mines here in Bisbee, they had 30,000 people in the town, and they had 4,000 men going underground every single day. And they pulled that rock out. That's what it was all about. Break ground, pull that rock out, send it to the smelter, process it, turn it into gold, silver, and copper. And you're going to find out just how important copper became once we discovered something called electricity. Everything changed then. But by the time they were done, they pulled out 8 billion pounds of copper. They pulled out 150 million ounces of silver. They pulled out 3 million ounces of gold. So this was quite a bonanza mine. This is a good place to get a job. You can make good money, make a life, make a living, support your family. And they were at it for 97 years. We're going to find out more about that as we go down the track. Now, everybody signed their waivers, right?
Yep.
Well, the waiver gives us permission to harvest your organs, so you want to be thinking about which one you think you can give up.
Okay.
And also in that waiver, it named me as the beneficiary of your life insurance policy. So I have every reason not to bring you back out, actually. But, well, I know you got something to look forward now, defending yourself. All right, so we're going to go back here. Sometimes I entertain myself, I'm sorry. When you get to like the 5th tour, you start making things up. So we're going to head on down the track here. Listen for that bell, because we're on our way. Now, we're in the old Wild West here. Yeah, we are. And the old cowboys back in that day, when they were excited about something, they weren't shy about letting you know. Well, how'd they let you know? Well, they gave out a great big old yee-haw. So if you're ready to go, let me know. You ready to go underground?
Yeehaw!
Okay, here we go. Ain't no stopping us now. We're on our way. Listen for that bell. We're moving out. So even though I've stopped the train, you want to stay seated, because I'm going to open up that air door that I mentioned previously. So give me a moment to pop that open for us, and we're going to head on down this track. The world's copper from the mines here in Arizona, and a lot of it came from right here. So they were pulling that out, and they managed to pull all that together, and they had to be safe, and they had to be organized. One of the ways, a couple of ways they were safe and organized is they used bells to communicate. You've already figured that out. You've heard some bells ringing already. And then down up ahead of us, you can see some green lights. They communicated with lights as well. Because if you had 4,000 men coming in these mines, every day you had to have systems, and you had to have procedures in place. So those green lights up ahead, any traffic light you've ever seen in your whole life, if it was green, it means go. And that's what that light means. That means there's no other train sharing this track with us. So let's head on down here and find out what those miners were doing. We're heading down here to that furthest green light, and it's kind of a famous light. It's even almost legendary. It's one you've heard of before. I know you have. It is the light at the end of the tunnel. Oh man, tough crowd.
That would be cool. Rice. Great. Uncle Sam's shaft.
I hope everybody enjoyed the ride. The price of admission, just the train ride itself is worth the price of admission.
Yeah.
I did look at the gas gauge and I see we're almost on empty, so you don't mind pushing the train out, do you?
Oh, we got this.
Yeah, we got it.
I'm glad you're good sports about it. Now we're gonna head down here. I'm gonna walk past you. Then you're gonna hop off the train. We're gonna be in a very unique part of the mine down here. Let's stop down here. Come on down here with me.
Gosh.
Keep on coming down. So what's your favorite restaurant in Mesa?
That's hard.
That's a hard one.
Red, white, and
That's a
brew.
hard choice.
Red, white, and brew.
Okay. You're gonna buy me a gift certificate so if I show up I can redeem it?
Sure.
Okay, I like this tour already. Hey, so here we are in the intersection of three different mines. Copper Queen, obviously that's our namesake mine. Then back here, there's one called the Copper Prince. And what's so special about that? Well, that's our evacuation route. Because the miners always had 2 ways in and 2 ways out. That was the art and the science of mining. They always had a back door. Because back in those early days when they had dynamite down here, you might not be able to get out the way you came in if things transpired in a certain way. But there hasn't been dynamite down here for 70 years, so we're in pretty good shape. Now that's good to know that's there, though. It's comforting to know it's available. Now we're going to head down this way. This is another mine called the Southwest, okay? And this is called a cross-cut tunnel. This came down this way, then at a right angle to it, they drove this cross-cut. And what were they doing? Well, they made this into a haulage tunnel. A new word for you. Yeah, and that's how they carried the ore out of here. And the haulage tunnel concept was that this is at ground level. So it was really easy to move those ore cars in and out because we're at ground level. We're not using any kind of lifts or elevators or cages or anything to move rock and men because this is right here at the haulage level, right here at the ground level. So let's head on down here. We're going to find out what those miners were doing. What were they doing? Well, they were drilling holes in the rock. They were blasting it apart with explosives. Then they were mucking it out. And you're saying, wait a minute, I know what those first two are. I'm wondering about number 3. We're going to find out. So we're going to come down this way. You're going to be on the right-hand side. I'm going to be on the left. As we walk down here, watch your footing because those tracks stick up. Come on down here, Plymouth. Okay, you can come right about down here. You can stop right about there. That's good. Now, Everybody can come down here and get again that wall. Again it? Yeah, I'm talking like my old West Virginia uncles. Why am I talking like them? They were coal miners. And they came into the mines and they worked 10 hours a day, just like the miners here did. 10 hours a day. What did they do? Well, they got into this host rock, and here it is. This is called calcium carbonate. Those of you who are rock fanatics, and it's gray, it's brown, and it's all around you. And another thing about it is, it's totally worthless, okay? It's perfectly good to make a limestone driveway, or perfectly good to make a limestone wall, but the miners had a name for it because it had no value mineralogically, if you like words like that. And it was perfectly good for those everyday purposes. If you went to the supply house to buy gravel, you might buy some of this limestone. But the miners called it overburden. It was overburdensome about it. Well, it was what got in the way. Well, what were they after? If that got in the way and that was considered waste, what was it they were coming here to get? Well, they initially came down here to get gold and silver because they knew there was a whole lot of silver in Tombstone. They said, let's go get some for us. Well, they started digging around and they found out there wasn't that such an abundant supply of silver, but there was a lot of this right here. This, what is this? This is malachite, okay? And what makes it malachite? It has these green and blue flecks in it. That's the ore that they really wanted. What does that do? Well, that's copper in its native state, in its natural state. And a weird thing about it is, it's the same color as the Statue of Liberty, isn't it? Yeah. So in the earth, it looks like that, and then they take it and process it, make it all shiny and pretty, and then put it out in the air, it oxidizes, and it turns back to that color, okay? But the interesting thing about this is they came and found it down here, and they all of a sudden they found a use for it. A use? Well, the other stuff they found, gold and silver, people had used that for signs of wealth for hundreds of years. They made jewelry out of it. They made money out of it. Same with silver. But this stuff, the Egyptians had used old gold or old copper like this to make tools, to make weapons, but it's very soft and it had a very low melting temperature. But then something happened. I told you they came here in 1877. Something happened in the 1880s. Well, what happened? Well, we discovered electricity. Whoa. And they've been talking about electricity for 100 years. Benjamin Franklin, you know, with his little experiment with the kite and all that. Benjamin Franklin actually came up with the concept of positive and negative charges. He was one of the first people to talk about that concept. And it, of course, held true. But that when you take those positive and negative charges and put them in the same place, they don't like it. And they fight each other. And that's what makes things spin, because they're fighting each other. And that's why we have motors. Okay? Take two magnets and put them together. Put the south to the south and the north to the north, and you have problems, don't you? They resist, they fight each other with a lot of force, and that's why electric motors work with armatures and commutators and all that stuff. But the critical thing is, to make that work, they needed this. They needed copper, and they needed thousands and thousands of miles of it. Thousands of miles of copper wire for what? Some inventions you know about, you just never thought about it. Telegraph. Used to take 7 months for a letter to get from San Francisco to New York City. Now you send it through copper wire. Then telephones. Oh my God. Telephones came along. They patented them. For the first time in the history of the world, you could hear your friend's voice and you weren't even in the same room with them. Man, did they like that? Oh man, everybody had to have one. If you don't think people enjoy their telephones and they need them, just take somebody's cell phone and hide it for an hour. See what happens to them. You'll see them start to go a little bit, they'll start to come apart, okay? Then a third thing, 1885. That was the year that a man named Thomas Alva Edison from Milan, Ohio, a good Ohio boy, sorry Michigan, but he patented the incandescent light bulb. And incandescent was a word he made up. He liked to make up words. Incandescent means it has no candle in it, okay? Because it's just a glowing wire with electricity surging through it, okay? And my grandpa used to call his electric bill, he used to call it his light bill. Because when he was a little boy, he was born in 1884, and they started bringing electricity into the homes, and everybody wanted it. Everybody wanted electric light. People liked staying up late at night. For hundreds of years, when it got dark, everybody went to bed. Now they had some lamps, but they had little flames in them, like little lamps, with like little oil lamps. The Greeks had them. Even the colonial people, they had whale oil lamps, didn't they? Whale oil? Mm-hmm. What does it take to get whale oil? You got to go out in the ocean, look for a mammal floating around out there that weighs a couple of tons, several tons. Kill it. Well, first find it, then kill it, then cut it up, then melt its fat. Oh God, yeah. How horrifying. Well, that's how far they went just to have light at night. Now all of a sudden you have electric light, you flip a switch, light comes on. No flame, no smell, no smoke, and that's fascinating. And my grandpa loved that, and that was his light bill. He didn't have a curler to curl his hair at night. He didn't have an electric refrigerator. He didn't have any of that, but he had electric power in his house because he wanted electric light, okay? So those three things happened: telephone, telegraph, and electric light. Oh boy, did that change the world? Yes, it did. And what did they need to make that work? Those thousands of miles of copper wire I was talking about. And where did it come from? Holes in the ground like this. What did it look like? Just like that. So they had to get it out of here. 1877 they came down. 1880 all this demand for copper starts happening. So they got young men, 15 years of age, and they pushed these ore cars out of here. They pushed them out to the front door. What happened to those carloads of broken up rock then? They called this muck, by the way. That was their name for it. You and I wouldn't call it muck, but they drilled holes in the rock, blasted it apart with explosives, broke it up into portable chunks, put it in these ore cars. So they pushed the muck out of here, push it out to the smelter. The smelter, they would crush it, make it into gravel-sized pieces. Then they took it and pulverized it, made it into powder. And what did they do with it after that? They put it in huge vats and melted it. And then they separated it out. They had a process. They were very familiar with what the process was. They knew all that chemistry stuff, like atomic numbers and specific gravity, all that stuff you forgot from chemistry already. And they would take that and process it and sort out the waste, that calcium carbonate, that gray and brown rock. They processed out that waste rock, took it and put it in waste dumps. The good stuff, the malachite, took that to El Paso. The gold, El Paso. The silver, El Paso. And that's where they broke it down and made it into useful material that they could use for money, for jewelry, and for those copper wires that were becoming so important. So the trammers pushed it out, took that material to the smelter. They couldn't push it out fast enough. The trammers were down here like in 1880, 1882. And then as time went on, they said, man, we need more copper. The world's crying out for it. I told you 30% came from Arizona, and the world wanted it, the world needed it, the world was glad to pay good money for it. So they said, let's get it out there, and let's make money selling it. So the miners made good lives and good livings by pulling it out of the ground. The stockholders, they made all kinds of money. And they didn't do anything except stay home, but they bought the right stock, okay? That's the nature of stock, isn't it? So the mules came down here, 1901. They trained them on the surface to pull 4 of these ore cars at a time. So the miner would say, giddy up! And the mule would head down this track. And as the mule headed down the track, the mule could hear the chains between each of the ore cars snap because they'd been slack, and then when the mule pulled the car down, the chains would go taut. So the mule would hear car number 1, car number 2, car number 3, car number 4. And they'd been trained to pull 4, and then the tricky miners hooked on a 5th one. Why? They got bonus money. The more rock you the more rock you could move, you were above company standard. Standard was the amount of tonnage you're supposed to move in your shift. If you loaded an extra car, you might get a little bit fatter pay envelope. Is that a good thing? Yeah. Especially if people are expecting you to bring home payroll every 2 weeks. So if you had an extra tonnage on your tally sheet that you filed with the shift supervisor, that was all good for you. So the mule would hear that 5th chain snap. What did the mule do when he heard that 5th chain? Guess.
Stopped.
Stopped. Exactly right. And because you got that right, you get a genuine gift from the Bisbee Mining Society. You get a hard hat and a pick and shovel. You get to take that with you. Now, because that has a ring on it, you get a free ear piercing to go along with that. So you might want to pick out which ear you want. Okay. Now, you could do the septum thing either. Okay. That's available too. But you get that because you answered the question, because the mills would stop. And why did they stop? Well, they knew they were supposed to pull 4, and they were members of the first underground union. Not 5, 4. Okay. So they pulled them out of here, but once again, they couldn't pull them out fast enough. So in 1911, they brought electricity down here. Right there's the line the electricity went through. 220 volts DC, and they hooked trolleys up to that line. The trolleys had a big boom arm on them, and they would roll along that track, and the trolleys were just gigantic motors. That's pretty much all they were. And you've seen trolleys before. They have them in San Francisco, but they're cable cars. They're not electric. They have them in New Orleans. Those are electric. And they travel down the track, and those trolleys are very powerful with those big motors in them, and they could pull 30 ore cars down this track at a time with those huge motors inside of them. So the trolleys would come flying down this track, pulling out 30 ore cars at a time. Whoa, man, that was something, wasn't it? 1911, they brought down the electricity. Wow. I mentioned that they opened this tunnel in 1915. Well, some things happened in 1915. They had more power drills, so they were moving out more rock. And then something else happened. They were using that copper for wire because people wanted it. They liked it. They liked having those conveniences that the copper wire afforded them. But then something else happened. People decided they didn't like going to the bathroom in the backyard. They've been doing it for a long time, and it was cold, and it was smelly, and it was full of bugs. So they said, we need something better. So they said, we got to fix this problem. And they knew they had found all these new deposits of copper. There had been copper before. Up there in the UP, they had copper mines, okay, big ones, lots of copper coming out of there. But then they found this. All of a sudden, they had an abundance of copper, more than they'd ever seen in the Americas before. And they said, maybe we could put this to use. How'd they do that? Copper pipe. They came up with copper pipe, and they used it to give everybody indoor plumbing. You have copper pipe in your house right now. Mm-hmm. You have copper wire in your house right now. You have copper in your spark plugs right now. And something you never thought about, but it's there, and that is you have copper in your blood, all right? Not a lot, but it's there, and if it's not there, you get sick. So this copper is pretty interesting stuff. It's doing a lot of interesting work for us, not only in the telephone, telegraph, and indoor lighting, but copper plumbing and copper pipe for indoor plumbing. And what happened was the copper had a special factor to it. Factor? Yeah, like what? Well, the factor is it's antimicrobial. You say, what? What's that mean? That means that bugs don't like it. It doesn't hurt people. But if you run water through that copper pipe, a little bit of copper seeps into that water, just enough so that germs and bugs and spores and fungus don't grow in that water if it goes through copper. So copper has made our drinking water safer for us and made it healthier. Man, we owe copper a lot of debt, don't we? We do a great debt of gratitude because copper changed everything we do in our world. Okay, If you think about it, the first president who was assassinated, Abraham Lincoln, lived a very different life from the third president who was assassinaid, William McKinley. You say, what is he talking about? During that period of time, that's when electricity took over, and that's when indoor plumbing came along, and all those things were amplified and made our lives very different. Lincoln lived a very different life than McKinley, although they were both cut short by being murdered. But the copper is what made the difference. So it's kind of fascinating to think about, isn't it? Yeah. Yep. Very interesting. Yes. Now, copper is still very valuable. We still pull a lot of copper out of Arizona. There are huge copper mines in Arizona. There's one here in a town called Morenci, and they pull out 2% copper ore every day. They pull out 825,000 tons of copper ore every day. And they take it and they smelt it and they refine it and they turn it into copper. Somebody did the math for me and they said they're getting 14,000 tons of pure copper out of Morenci every day, and they're selling it for $5 a pound. And is it needed? You bet it's needed. Every Tesla has 30 miles of copper windings in it. That's very fine copper wire wound together, so it works in opposition to itself, and that's how those motors inside the Tesla work. Also, we just passed an infrastructure bill. Our wise and wonderful people in Congress passed an infrastructure bill. What does that mean? We're going to need lots of copper wire if they're upgrading places with new wiring, and it means we're going to need a lot of copper pipe too, with all that new plumbing that's going in. Infrastructure requires copper. Where's it going to come from? Arizona. Okay. So we owe, once again, it's fascinating stuff because it's done a lot of good for us. So they brought those trolleys down here, they pulled that rock out, and by 1915, when they opened this tunnel, they were crying out for that copper, and as I've already pointed out to you, the world still is. Copper's still very important. The company that owns this mine is called Freeport Minerals. And Freeport Minerals and Freeport McMoran, the copper company, they own this mine and a lot of other ones. They rent this one out to the city of Bisbee for $300 a year, so people get to see the old-timey underground mines, okay?
Nice.
But the real work that they're doing is going on in Chile, Peru, and Freeport owns a mine in Indonesia that's bigger than Long Island, and they're going to be pulling copper out of that mine for the next 100 years. So is copper still in demand? It's still very useful. Until everything becomes wireless, yeah, we're going to need copper. Yeah, it's piled up. There's big, huge mounds of waste where they took the limestone and melted it down. But then they said, people in Bisbee said, no, man, don't do that.
Yeah.
Nobody else has one of those. Let's keep it. Yeah, so it's very interesting. It's caved in a lot since I moved here 10 years ago. There's certain benches across on the other side. They used to be nice and stable. Now they're all fallen down. But what they did is they started at the top, and then they came in like 60 feet, and they came down 50 feet, 60, 50, 60, 50, 60, 50, and then they coming down and got narrower and narrower because the trucks would ride on that road. Okay, and then they slowly went down. And old miners who worked in there, they said it looks spooky from up above, but they said if you stand down the bottom and you look up, that is really frightening because it looks like it's all going to fall in on top of you. There's big boulders up there, and you can see all of it, and you go, oh my God, what am I doing down here? Yeah. So let's move on down here if we can, and we're going to take a look at these drills real quick. Yeah, these drills, these are powered by compressed air. They brought them down here about 1910, okay? And these drills are beasts. These things will drill and hammer, and they could drill a hole 7 feet deep into this face using one of those drills in about 5 minutes. But all these drills down underground here had a problem. And underground, you always were worried about air quality. The Copper Queen, not so much. It was always known as a mine that had good air, but also was also known as a very dry mine. But when they brought these drills down here, they'd start hammering away at these faces, and the dust would come up. And the dust was a problem in coal mines and copper mines. And the dust would, of course, would infect the miners' lungs, would affect the miners' lungs, okay? Not just infect them, but affect them. And the miners would get sick with lung diseases. In the coal mines, they got black lung disease. In the copper mines, they got something called silicosis. Silicosis, you're absolutely right, yeah. Man, you can tell this is the last tour. So silicosis, and they got that. And if you look at the old photos of the miners, they came down here in street clothes. They didn't have any kind of PPE at all. And they came down here and they said, man, it's really dusty down there. And they said, you want a job? That's the entrance right over there. Get down there. Because we got guys that will take this job away from you in a minute, all right? So they put up with that. And a lot of factories in the old days, they put them through a lot of terrible exposure to just all kinds of poisonous and carcinogenics. And so the miners were getting that silicosis, they were getting that black lung, and so they had to find a solution for that. So in 1912, they brought down water lines. And the water lines, they hooked them up to these drills, even these old ones, and they would run that water through these drills. There's a piston in here. This one is a much more modern drill compared to those. This is from right after World War II. It's called a Gardner-Denver jackleg, and that jackleg digs into the ground, and it takes the place of all that column structure and all those jack screws, etc. This thing will dig in the ground, and this drill can take off, and it only weighs like 105 pounds. So one man could manhandle this. That took 3, because that weighs 400 pounds. So one man could pick this up and take it wherever it was needed. Yeah, one man could, a man could, but not this man. I'm 76 years old. I'm not going to pick up anything that weighs 95 pounds. I don't care what it is. Well, if it was a gold block, of 95. I might try to pick that up. But what happened here is this thing could pump, they would pump the water down through this drill, has a piston in it, like I said. The water would gush out through the end of that steel, and they had those bits on it, those carbide bits made by the Timken Steel Company, and that water would gush through there. So as you're drilling that hole, that water would gush through there, and it would saturate that hole, saturate that dust. It was no longer airborne, could no longer float. It was not microscopic little floaties in the air. It was now mud, and once it was mud, nobody breathed it. Nobody got silicosis. All of a sudden, I can't say that. Nobody got silicosis, okay? So something as simple as a water line saved miners' lives. No longer were they dying at the age of 38 and 40 years of age from lung disease. They now were kept safe and alive and kept on working. Yeah. So now we've climbed into a big hole in the ground here. Let's go down and look at some little holes. And the little holes, that's how they did their blasting. And everybody wants to hear, how did they blow things up? Yeah. Let's take a look. So this is like the quickest lesson in the science of detonation that you've ever seen. What they did is, the first thing they did, listen for the L's in this scenario here. First thing they did is they drilled their holes and they located them. They located them in a particular, precise, specific pattern. So they loaded them. So they had a cut hole in the middle, one loaded with explosives, and then 4 relievers. Then a circle around that. Then a row up above called breast holes. Another row up above called skimmers. So they first located their holes, very precise and specific pattern. Then they loaded their holes with fuses, blasting caps, and dynamite. And you can see every black cord here represents that fuse. Then they trimmed the fuses. They cut them to length. Locate, load, cut to length. You like this? All these L's? And it took me a long time to think this up. So they cut the fuses to length then. And then they packed all the holes. They located them, loaded them with the explosives and fuses, cut their fuses to length. And then down here at the bottom, these were very important. These were called lifters, another L. They loaded those lifters with 150 sticks of dynamite. So this was the real workhorse of what they were doing here. So they cut these fuses to length so they could control the sequence of the blasts. So they would light them. They would light those fuses with a thing called a spitter rod. They move it around. Yeah, the spitter rod is a magnesium rod that would burn at 1500 degrees. So 2 miners would be down here. They'd spend the first 9 hours of their shift getting all this ready. Then the 10th hour was the blasting hour, and they would light their fuses. And then after they would light them, they would walk away. One miner would go up where the train is, one would go down here, and then another L, they would listen for the blast. Boom! This would go off first, and that was a cut hole, and it made a weak place. What was important about the weak place? It's very key to the science of detonation. That would go off, and then this would go off a second later. So boom, then boom, and when this went off, it didn't explode. It would implode into that weak place. Just the physics of it is such that this will explode. It doesn't have enough power to go all the way out there, but it has enough power to go into that weak place. Boom! Then the same thing would happen here. Blast into the weak. Boom! Then this would happen here. Blast into the weak. Boom! Explosion, implosion, implosion, implosion. So a very strange concept to us is the idea of implosion, but it blows in on itself, okay? And if you watch the YouTubes, I'm sure all of you watch the YouTubes from time to time.
Yep.
Usually people laugh when I say that, but when you watch the YouTube, you can watch the demolition of old buildings, and you see the old grain elevator in Dubuque, Iowa, and when they blow it up, the old grain elevator does not fall on top of the new bank. No, they know exactly where the debris field is going to be. How do they know? The science of detonation. They know what's going to implode and which way is it going to fall. It's great fun to watch those YouTubes where they do it wrong. And the grain elevator does fall on top of the new Arby's, okay? Which is hilarious, you know. I could watch that all day. But the key here is that by using the science of detonation and implosion, they controlled what happened here. So they would break this rock up into that stuff they put into those ore cars, into that muck. And this would go off last, the lifters would go boom, 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 then kaboom. And the name lifters tells you exactly what it did. Lift up that 40 tons. 40 tons of broken up rock. Lift it up and out and drop it right there. And it was very controlled destruction. It was destruction, yeah. Mining is a seek and destroy mission. Okay, that's what it's all about. And that was very controlled and specific and precise and focused destruction. So you didn't bring down your timbers. You didn't bring down your ceiling. This was not called a wall by the miners. This was called a rib. And this was not called a ceiling. It was called a back. Okay, so you didn't bring down. The only part of the rib you brought down is what you wanted to bring down. And when you got done, you had a hole 10 feet deep and 10 feet high and a pile of muck laying right here, what used to be in there. You didn't bring down the back. It was all very focused and very precise because they knew the laws of physics. If you drilled a pattern of holes like that, cut those fuses to those exact lengths so you controlled the sequence, packed specific amounts of explosives in those holes, it was going to do the same thing every time. And they did that hundreds of times. They drilled faces like this and lit those fuses and blew it apart. Intersected with the cage. Right here's the cage. And the cage was operated by a guy on the surface called the hoist engineer. And you communicated with him. They didn't have walkie-talkies. They didn't have telephones. They communicated with bells. Right there's the bell. And if you were on 5 and you needed a ride, you'd ring that bell. You say, what do you mean ring the bell? Well, there's a special bell code. Look right here. Level 5. You'd ring the bell. I'm on 5. I need a ride. I ring the bell. Ding, 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 ding. The hoist engineer hears it. He goes, oh, somebody needs a ride. I got to send the cage down to pick him up. And the guy up there, the hoist engineer, he was paid lots of money because he had to do that right. Those cages, they usually were in tandem and they move up and down, operated by gigantic motors on the surface. And that guy would spool that cable out and spool it out, pull it back, spool it out, pull it back, and raising and lowering those cages, listening to those bells to tell him where to send the cage. And that guy was supposed to be up there all by himself, and that was done on purpose. They didn't want him up there talking to his buddy about last night's poker game. They wanted him listening for that bell, because if something went wrong in there, things could go really, really wrong. There's an old miner who works here. He's 82 years old, and he was riding on that cage one day, and him and his buddies were on that cage, and they rang the bell. The cage came to pick him up. Then they rang another bell to tell him where to go next, and the guy from the top wasn't paying attention. And he pulled the wrong levers, and all of a sudden that cage was supposed to go up, and it went down. Now down below us, there are 2 levels, and they're both full of water. So they dropped that cage down there, and those miners went wham. All of a sudden they were in the dark and they were underwater. What do they do now? Well, lucky for them, the guy all of a sudden realized what he was doing. Whether he was drunk or sleepy or just inattentive, they don't know. They never did an investigation. But the guy dropped those miners into the water. So he goes wham, and he reverses those motors. They were underwater maybe 3 seconds, and then they came flying up out of there. And he said if he'd have left them down there, they could have died, they could have drowned, you know.
Yeah.
So the cage is a very dangerous place. A lot of things could happen with that. The motors up there were very, very powerful. They could put ore cars on the cage and move them. They didn't do it very often, but they could if they had to. Yeah. So it's kind of fascinating just how powerful that was. But that cage man, that hoist engineer, he had to pay good attention to what was going on.
Ooh, I can feel a blast of air.
Oh yeah.
Very strong blast of air.
Through there.
More stairs.
Very well ventilated. Good air, good air. Pressure. Please use the handrail. Oh, wow.
Whoa.
So, this stope is one of hundreds in the Bisbee mines, and it's one of the smallest and one of the oldest. There are many that are huge. There are some that are 1,000 feet in diameter. So they came here, in this particular stope, they came in this tunnel right here in 1881. They started digging on the top of this mountain. There's a big fan up there it's making that rumbling noise, and it's pulling 80,000 CFM in here. And they came in that tunnel back in that time, and it was all solid rock, and they found the good ores they were looking for right in here. They found that malachite, that copper. It's right in the middle of where my square light is. That greenish bluish ore that made the copper possible. Then there's some reddish brownish ore. The name of that is hematite. They smelted that down, and they got 1/8 of an ounce of gold for every ounce of that. It comes from the same root word as hemoglobin and hematology. I'll let you decide in your own mind
like a geode that
why
goes
they
back in
decided
right
to
there.
call that
Natural.
hematite. Now down below that malachite is some black and white. That's galena. That's where they got lead and silver. So they worked in here in this hard rock. This stuff is not like coal mines in any way. Coal is very unstable material. It's millions of years old, but it's rotting vegetation. So it's very unstable. 30 and 40 people will perish in a cave-in in a coal mine. The most people that ever perished in a coal mine in the Bisbee mines was 3. Sometimes they did have weak and loose places. That's a water course. That was made by nature.
Oh wow,
Man
look
did
at
not
that.
make that.
Yeah, right. I saw that.
So here we have something that's man-made called a square set. You can see here how they could build it up, they could build it out, and it's kind of like Legos, the way it goes together. And the beauty of it is in its corners. When it got under stress, and they were blasting down here with dynamite, and this mountain would move, and it did. When that happened, this thing would not collapse. These corners absorb all those stresses, and it will sway and crack and split and pop and bow, but it will not fall down. So a miner could be inside of here and be totally safe from any kind of cave-in. Here we have a diagram shows you how they could build it up, they could build it out, they could build it any way they wanted, and it would give them access to that ore. Now they came down here in 1881. They did that drilling that I mentioned before, but in the early days they didn't have any of this mechanized equipment, so they did all that drilling by hand. And they did it just about the most primitive way you can imagine. They had one man, one hammer, one chisel.
That's a natural pocket.
They didn't call it a chisel, they called it a steel. Just like John Henry had those steels up there in West Virginia to drive those tunnels for the railroad. They used these steels to drill holes. So they drilled here to this face, hit it, twist it, hit it, twist it, hit it, twist it. And they twisted it so it wouldn't get stuck, so they didn't have to try to knock it out. And also, it made a nice cylindrical hole for their dynamite. Then they would need a deeper hole, and it became a 2-man job. When they got so deep, they would collar that hole with that steel. Then they would put a larger one in here. One guy would still have to hold it to twist it. He's called the shaker. The guy that would swing that sledge, he was called a striker. This guy would hold, this guy would hit, okay? And they did have mistakes. They did miss sometimes. And when they missed, they got revenge. How'd they do that? Well, on Monday, this guy would be striking. Then on Tuesday, they would switch jobs. This guy would be shaking, okay? I meant to say shaking. So they would switch jobs. Shake on Monday, strike on Tuesday. So if the striker on Monday hit your hand, broke your thumb, you might remember the next day when you traded jobs with your partner. So the miners had their own way of keeping each other honest. Now they got rid of those hand drills, and they went to these power drills, and they worked down here pulling that rock out of here. They started up high, and then they loaded the ore out down low. Started up high, drilling, blasting, and mucking, and dropping that muck down that tunnel right there, and hauling it out of here. They worked for 97 years, pulling that rock out. In 97 years, they had 384 fatalities, which is not a very good safety record, but it's tiny compared to coal. Coal, you can have 30 and 40 people perish in one cave-in. Now here, that never happened. Now they knew there was somebody here to protect them. Protect them? Well, like who? Well, when they found his face in the rock, they left it there. And his face is still there today. And that is a guy named Headless John. Headless John was the phantom of the mine. Headless John was the guy that was the spirit of the mine. he kept them safe, kept them protected, and so they knew that when they got in trouble, all they had to. Thanks again for coming. Enjoy your
Thank you so much for watching, loves. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please let us know by giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. I hope everybody's having a great day. Remember to be kind to everybody. We'll see you on the next adventure. Love you guys. Bye.
Once again, folks, thank you so very much for coming to see us. And I encourage you to stay curious.
What'd you think of the tour, honey?
Very early motor.
So?
That was fun. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That was definitely an interesting experience.
I was wondering how they did that.
Hard to say what's out here.
The stope was really cool, and I would have loved to have been able to have a little bit more free reign to look around.
Me too.
And explore a little bit further back in some of the little nooks and crannies and corners. But yeah.
That was very cool, you guys. I enjoyed it a lot.
Very, very cool. Yeah, yeah.
Because I'm a gym baby, so that was awesome.
And I look good in a hard hat.
You do look good in a hard hat.
I don't look bad in a hard hat, that's for sure.